Hello, my name is Tash Mitch, and I'm a chakra alchemist. And today I've got the honor and pleasure of having Anita Brey with me. Anita is a mediator, she's an energy healer, and she's an artist. And the part of her work that I came across was her energy editing work, which was just so profoundly powerful in the way that I'd never come across this work before. And it felt really good to invite you into the chakra alchemy space to really reference your work through each of the chakras. So welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Tash. It's great to be here. I'm excited. Thanks.
So basically, we're going to start from the base and move up to the crown and really just open it out to sort of get a take of the energy editing work through your eyes, basically, because I absolutely fell in love with the work that you do. So yeah, I'd love to bring that out, but also just bringing a take of what each of the chakras mean to you.
Sure. Okay, great. Thanks. So just to give you sort of a quick synopsis about energy editing.
Yeah.
So in that form of healing work, what I'm doing is working with people on a kinesiology and psychological perspective, right? So I'm using muscle testing to identify blocks in people's energy flow, right? So it doesn't mean that something's wrong. That was really hard for me when I first started to do the work.
Yeah.
It's just identifying it and then moving through a clearing with a particular with someone around that block. So in the first chakra, that's all about survival, right?
Yeah.
And your connection to the earth and being able to be present on the planet. And a lot of times the blocks that I find in the first chakra are fears. So we clear all types of fears, whether it's a phobia, like something. I've had a couple clients who have reoccurring phobias. So that's been really lovely to alleviate tension around those phobias and allow people to live free from those.
I can imagine. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like so much of the base chakra as well is so connected to our community, is connected to our tribe, is connected to our ancestry. Because it's that sense of belonging, isn't it? It's that sense of saying, like, I'm in my body and I'm on planet Earth, and I'm actually really happy about that. I'm happy to actually really root into that.
Yeah, and I'm safe.
Yes.
You know?
The safety bit is a really big one, I feel, for the base chakra, definitely.
Mm-hmm. And I totally agree with you. That sense of belonging is a really big one that comes up for people.
Yeah. And with the base, is when we talk about belonging and physical belonging, I mean, it then starts to ricochet into things like money, how we're able to sustain ourselves, our relationship with food on a physical basis, like how we nourish ourselves. And there's so much that can get wrapped up in that kind of block area with the base chakra from that point of view, isn't there?
Definitely. And the whole self-care, right?
Yeah.
Like being able to take care of yourself, to your point, directly food and money, but ultimately it comes down to self-nourishing, right? To connect with your work, allowing the earth to give to you.
When you think of self-care, what comes up for you? What was your lens on self-care?
It's honestly, it's one of the most important things a person can do for themselves. I think it's so key. And so there's energetic self-care. I think that's sort of where it starts.
Yeah.
Like really giving to yourself and nourishing yourself on an energetic level. And I feel like from there, from that center, everything else sort of comes out. Like the money comes out, the food comes out, your clothes come out, your home environment comes out, your relationships. Yeah. So I think it all starts sort of internally and really choosing to love yourself.
Yeah. That's such a big one. And also what I'm hearing with that is that we actually, with the choice, we have to put some kind of attention on what really matters to us with the self-care piece. Because very often, I know for myself, it wasn't something that I always did. And so I was quite drifty in that area of the self-care. Sometimes I'd be really quite, nourishing and nurturing of self, and then other times completely neglectful. And then realize that actually it's a piece that we really need to put attention to, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's like a muscle. You know what I mean? It's not like something that's reinforced in our society and our culture at the moment.
Yeah.
So it is almost countercultural,
Yeah.
right? And it's something that we have to practice and learn. And I think the more we do it, to your point, like just noticing, oh, I'm not being as loving with myself at the moment as I could be, and kind of moving back to that place where it is more loving and nurturing.
Absolutely. So moving up to the sacral chakra, because the sacral chakra is our feeling body, it's our emotional body. It's all the ways that we merge our energy with the world, our intimate relationships, our sensuality, our sexuality. But it's kind of like that way that for me, it's quite an artistic, creative chakra, because it's all the ways our energy goes out into the world and makes things, basically. So when you actually put your lens onto the sacral, what comes up for you there?
That's a good question. It is, again, it's connected very closely to the first chakra. Like, it is about safety, and having that sort of having that grounding first allows for the creativity and allows for the emotional expression. So, and there's, definitely a continuation in the theme around clearing blocks around that there, in terms of what is safe to create, what is safe to share.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what is safe to feel? Because so many times it's kind of like, and I think that's a lot of times where the block comes up for a lot of us. Certainly for me, I can say that I didn't realize how important it was to feel my feelings to completion until I started actually doing it. When you get that sort of surge, especially when there are adverse feelings. So, for example, feelings of shame, or feelings of anger, or feelings of unworthiness. Like, when we get those feelings, like for me, there was a real quick rush past that. Like, okay, let's just and I didn't realize how important it was to kind of feel sometimes those feelings to completion, and to realize that we can build them up. When we rush past them, we can build them up so much to be this massive thing, when ultimately, when we sit with them, it dissipates to the point where it becomes so small, and we realize, there wasn't really a lot there in the first place.
Yeah, and I think there's, like, to your point, there's so much power in just allowing yourself to feel the feeling and let it flow through you, instead of blocking it, right? Because then essentially you're creating that stop energy in your overall energy system flow, right? So that's brilliant, to just give yourself the space to feel all of the unpleasant feelings, and not like wallowing in it, but not suppressing it, not stopping it. One of the things I see a lot in the second chakra too is that, the level of sexual self-expression, right? And that sort of folds back into that self-care, because again, it starts with our relationship with ourselves. Yeah. Right. So being able to cultivate our sexual energy with ourselves in a sacred space, and then from there being able to do it with a partner, and in a broader perspective in our communities. But that doesn't mean like having an open relationship. It means just expressing your femininity, expressing your sexuality, your sensuality freely, and having healthy boundaries. Because ultimately you're still protecting and taking care of and nurturing yourself.
Yeah. Right? Oh, that's huge, isn't it? Because there's such that boundary element and that push-pull element. I always feel with your work, definitely, it feels very much like it's about flow. It's about getting into flow. It's about allowing the energy to flow. And for that to happen, the kind of like residue elements that sort of like inform our actions. So, for example, sexuality could come from anger, but likewise, it can come from deep-seated sensuality or femininity as well. And one flows really beautifully, and one doesn't flow at all. You know.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's kind of like knowing the difference in a lot of ways, which I feel like your work really does. It brings us to the difference between what's flow and what isn't flow for us, basically.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's the heart of the work is, finding those spots in someone's energy system where there is a block, and then helping them remove it so they are flowing again, essentially. Yeah.
So when we move up to the solar plexus, because the solar plexus is so much about our identity, our personal power, our sense of worth, our sense of self-value, and really how we kind of like stand and the ground we stand on when we make any statement from the I am place, like I am, whatever I am, is really coming from that solar plexus area. So when you think of the solar plexus, what comes up for you there with your work?
It really is like your power source to a certain degree, right? It's like there's a lot of will there. And with most of my clients, that's where they're holding a lot of blocks around their career. It's almost like the first and second chakra kind of bubble up and want to express through the third chakra into the world, right? In the form of career. In most cases, it's around career.
Yeah. And definitely, it's one of those where because a lot of people can get blocked with the feeler element of the solar plexus chakra. Am I worthy enough is a big one, because that really does come from, I feel really worthy, whichever way, but it comes very much from this area. And a lot of times the adverse element of it, the unworthiness element of it, has us reaching out with this energy to figure out, are we worthy of this space that we're holding right now? And whatever the information comes back, how we interpret that information will be how small we actually make ourselves or how great we stand,
Yes, absolutely. And there's something to that I think is it's almost counterculture, right? Where it's like taking up space in a room, right? Like really expanding and taking up space in a room. There's this cultural idea that if you do that, then there's no space for other people to be in the room, and that's not true, right? Like you shining, being as bright as you feel as you want to be, right? Inspires and allows other people to shine and lets them know, hey, it's safe to shine. You can shine. Yeah. It's like the whole idea of all the, as the tide rises, all the boats rise.
Yeah.
Right? It's the same kind of concept with being your light, essentially.
Yeah. The one thing that I would say about the shining element is that shining makes you seen, and I know a lot of people can sometimes struggle, which is part of that element of wanting to. I think sometimes when we actually want to be small or we want to make ourselves less, a lot of that is a fear of actually being seen, of being. And possibly being criticized. That's a lot of times where that's coming from, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing I find a lot in the third chakra that's related to that are power dynamics. Right? So, and again, it's the same thing, like making yourself small, making yourself big, making somebody else feel safe because you don't feel safe. So
passive aggression is coming to mind.
Yes. So clearing that, getting that to be a sort of a clean flow through one's third chakra, right? I think it really empowers people to have empowering relationships with people, right? Where it truly is a win-win. There isn't a win-lose, right? That competition and that sort of antiquated idea really kind of goes out the window, and you really create this sense of empowerment with each other, like the whole idea of you're stronger together, right?
Yeah, yeah. That is quite huge because basically, definitely from the solar plexus chakra. That the thing is I think our society has given us this idea of what infinity looks like. So when we take up our space, it's always shown by like a really brash, loud person that kind of like speaks so loudly that nobody else can actually get a word in, and speaks so fast that it's basically they dominate everything about a room, or they dominate everything about a space. And can be quite a controlling character. So like basically that extreme is always given to us in some shape or form when we are sort of like referencing it to shining our light, or basically taking up our infinite space. And it will be really interesting to get your lens on what the healthy version of that is, because for me the healthy version of that is very much about being self, like planting self into the earth and really grounding and just being yourself. How does it come across for you?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Like, I think it's really individual. I think there is a form that's quiet power.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And there's stillness with it and silence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in that form, it's almost like a magnetic power where you're sort of drawing things to you.
Yes. Yes, because you're so unified where you are that ultimately your magnetism to that unification becomes so strong, someone really recognizes it. And for me, it's a lot of times when we are trying to actually fit in, or we're trying to make ourselves liked, there isn't unification because we're all about the outside. So, we haven't really kind of checked in on who am I in the situation, what am I actually feeling, and really grounding and unifying in that. And that's been a huge learning curve, and is an everyday learning curve for me, definitely. That, finding that unification wherever I am.
Me too, and feeling the stuff that I don't want to feel.
Yes.
When it comes up.
Yeah. And being able to express it, well, that's coming up to the throat, but also being able to express it, being able to be true to it, stand in it and really affirm it and express it. I mean, that comes definitely from that solar plexus area, being true to where you stand, really, is so much about the solar plexus. So when we move up to the heart chakra, because the heart chakra for me is really that element of giving and receiving. It's unconditional love, but it's that sort of sense of giving with generosity, with fullness, and also that receiving with graciousness and with kind of like a sacredness for the gift that was given, And the divine for me lives and breathes in the heart, because it's exactly that flow of energy inwards and outwards, but it's also that flow that allows energy to move up and down as well, freely. When it comes to the heart for you, what comes up there?
It really is an axis point, right? Like, it does feel like a true center between like above and below, material and immaterial,
yes.
And a manifestation point. And I know this sounds a little bit strange, but a lot of what I find in my energy editing work is I'm clearing limiting beliefs in the heart. And it's almost like, which is again counterintuitive, because you think the limiting beliefs would be sort of in your sixth chakra, but really that's more, we'll talk about that when we get there, but that's more about vision and clarity. The heart there is a lot of kind of thought that is held there where we manifest from, right? So I'm finding in my work, I clear a lot of limiting beliefs that are held in the heart, area.
What comes up when you're talking about that is I'm sensing that pharaoh flow, because we do have sometimes that sense of pharaoh flow. Like basically when we feel that flow for the energy to move outwards, either to actually express something outwards and express it generously, or we kind of like feel that energy to actually receive something, or even to ask for something from the heart. There can be such blockage with that sort of like flow, You know, everything's flowing, but you're like, no, 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 no. There's kind of like that sense of protection of the flow almost, you know?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like it is a source, or it can be a place of contraction,
Yeah.
right? So when somebody's contracted there, like, yeah, it definitely affects their life, right? It affects how they're being in the world, what they can receive,
Yeah.
how deep their relationships can show up,
Yeah.
can manifest, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, surrender is a big one for the heart, I feel. Because
Hmm.
if we've got too much control, like we want to have control over every iota of our lives, that's
Yeah,
exactly where the blockage comes in, because the heart isn't allowed to inform you. The heart isn't allowed to flow freely, because every movement of the heart is actually analyzed by the mind to see if it's going to create something adverse to what we think should be happening, you know? And ultimately, that's kind of like a lot of the times where the hiccup comes from, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. It's almost like we stop, and on some level, we stop ourselves from receiving, right?
Yeah.
We're close to receiving, which is so sad.
Yeah.
Because there's the other part of us that's like, no, I really want that. I really want that. That's trying really hard, but our heart is like, nope, that's
Yeah.
not safe, or
Yeah.
whatever the belief is. Like,
Yeah. And what's coming up is that sense of not being afraid of your own flow, you know, not being afraid of your own flow. There was always a sense sometimes where people feel like that if you follow your heart, it could get really messy, and it could take you completely outside. And this can be true sometimes. It can take you outside of your comfort zone, because if you have got control in it, you kind of like you keep yourself boxed into this area. And when you feel the heart flowing outside of your box, it's kind of like you try and make sure that everything is contained so you can understand it. And the heart doesn't speak that language, does it? It speaks a language of flow. And sometimes it flows in what could be considered by the mind in very inconvenient ways. But
yeah,
ultimately, the honoring of the heart is so important, isn't it? Because of it being the access point.
absolutely, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think I agree with you. There is something about Um, and I think that's really a learning experience as a human being, right?
Mm.
Like learning to follow your heart, right? Learning to receive from your heart, but also, being able to have energetic boundaries
Yes.
and being safe. So it doesn't mean, following your heart means allowing anybody to come into your space, or, um, throwing your whole life away to go do a wild, crazy thing, unless that's really what you want to do,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't mean being wild and out of control, but it does mean being connected to your source,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? To
Yeah.
your source, and really receiving from everything.
Absolutely. The connection to your source is a huge piece there, I
Mm.
feel, because the connection to your source is always a connection to your deepest wisdom and your highest self.
Mhm.
And sometimes that deepest wisdom and higher self is wildness, but it's not the wildness that's destructive, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well said.
So when we move up to the throat chakra, because the throat chakra just wants to express the heart all the time, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It wants to be that level of expression for the heart. But it also, I feel like with the throat, it's our speaking of our truth into the world. Our speaking of our being into the world really comes from the throat chakra. So when you feel into the throat chakra, what comes up for you there?
Manifestation is huge. The whole power of your word. Um, Word creates reality.
Mm.
Like, I feel like in my experience, there's so much truth in that. There's so
Yes.
much connected to that. And not only like what we're actually verbally expressing, but what we're telling ourselves, that internal voice, I feel like is almost like an internal expression and an internal creation, whereas what we say out loud sort of manifests what we're creating externally.
Yeah, yeah. It certainly lets the world know what's going on with us, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, that's so true about the vocalization element. That actually is really important, but also really honoring exactly what expression's coming up for us at any one time or another, and that expression could take so many different forms. I feel it's just about movement a lot of times, you know. That sense of, I mean, you could be silent and just dance it out, for example. Even stillness can have a certain level of movement in it, but there is that sort of like movement of expression that comes from the throat.
Absolutely. And there is like, to your point, like it can be any form of expression, right? Like
Mm,
art making,
yes,
dancing,
yes,
singing in the shower, I think is
yes,
such a beautiful form of self-care, right?
yes,
Like singing your favorite song in the shower as you get ready, for
yes.
your day
Mm,
is can be so powerful. And it's really simple, but it's like giving giving yourself the space to really enjoy that.
yeah. Because it
Yeah.
really, for me, the throat chakra, I think all the chakras have the ability to do that, but the throat chakra specifically, the expression element specifically, is the area that I really get introduced to myself most. You
Mm-hmm.
know, when I'm like dancing to my own rhythm, or I'm singing my own song, or I'm speaking my truth, or sometimes when I'm sitting in silence and just allowing whatever wants to communicate itself to be heard and communicated.
Mm-hmm.
All of that has been so informing of my own divine connection with self, but like, who am I? You know, that the throat chakra is always the one that seems to inform me the most of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Would you say it's the same for you, or do you?
So
Yeah.
definitely. And I feel like as you're saying that, I was just sort of feeling into it for myself, and I feel like I get lost a lot in my throat chakra, almost like more so than the other chakras.
Yeah.
I'm a painter,
Mm.
and my husband's a musician, so I sing with him sometimes,
Yeah.
but I'm terrible. But I still love doing it just because I feel like something else comes out of me
Yeah.
that that I can't access otherwise.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really the voice feels different than the other chakras, right? Because there is something directly connected to your fifth chakra, whereas like your third chakra doesn't make a noise. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it just stands there and emanates something. Yeah.
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 It expresses itself differently, but the fifth chakra feels so direct. I
Yes.
think that's what's so fascinating about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It really tunes into your particular tune, basically, your particular sound, and the beat of your drum that completely comes out of the throat, definitely. So
Yeah.
when we move this energy up to the third eye, because the third eye for me is that area where we actually communicate on a real subtle level, on anything basically, from our soul connection, from our divinity, from our spiritual connection, but also with the world around us, how we pick up and feel, and hear into the world around us. Basically, a lot of times the things that aren't actually voiced or said or expressed, how we pick up on that, how we actually pick up the radiance and essence of things. So when you actually sort of put your lens onto the third eye, what comes up there?
Yeah, third eye is it's so yummy.
Mm,
Um, the way it shows up in my work is around being clear,
yeah.
like being able to having clarity around what's really happening and what you're really creating and how you're being in the world, right? There's a certain level of, in the lower chakras, there's, it's a bit more emotional, or
Mm,
it can be a bit more charged. When you get to the sixth chakra, there's more clarity available.
mm,
And
mm.
it's a vision that I think is really powerful. And I think neutrality,
Yeah, yeah,
right? So being willing and able to see things differently than you could, or experience things differently than you could from your other chakras.
yes, yeah. The third eye for me has been one that is a continuous learning because I feel like in order for you to see the clarity, like you're saying, there has to be an element of actually taking yourself out of your own projections and your own map of the world and really entering in a non-judgmental way into the map of another person's world. You know, sort of saying, this is how I feel about this, but what do you feel about it? And sometimes not even vocalizing it, just kind of like really taking a step back and looking from that place is where I feel like the third eye chakra is at most potent.
Yeah. And I feel like the ability to read from that perspective is so powerful. So to your point earlier about using it as a way to connect with people in your surroundings, like it is so powerful to be able to see from that perspective.
Yeah. And there's such an element of surrender, I feel, with the third eye chakra as well, because again, for that information to come through clearly, there's an opening, a space, an invitation, and a surrendering for what is being shown, basically.
Absolutely. Like you have to be willing to see. Sometimes we don't want to see stuff.
Yeah, and also to know that whatever actually comes up, because a lot of times with the third eye, exactly like you're saying, people, and we have had a culture where it's not always been safe to express the third eye. Certainly, you know, in the Dark Ages, and the Dark Ages are called the Dark Ages for a reason, right? Because basically everyone was shutting off their eyes. But like, you know, it wasn't safe for a while for people to actually express from that place. And I feel like now there's more of an opening where people can find ways of expressing in a way that's acceptable to themselves first, but also can meet acceptability in the outside world, you know, meeting and merging with other people from this space of like real power. But there's so many people that are still afraid to see, you know?
Or I think there's definitely the fear, and there isn't an easy pathway to get there, right? It's not like something you learn as a child directly, right? As a kid, you learn how to tie your shoes, but the way that in a way that's very direct in most cases, right? Or you learn how to drive a car in a way that's very direct, but you don't learn in a very direct way how to use your vision, you know, how to use your chakras.
Yes.
Right, how to have energetic boundaries. And I think that's such powerful information.
I'm seeing Harry Potter when you say that. You know Harry Potter, the books.
Oh, yeah.
He's kind of like going to school and being taught a curriculum that is completely different to the curriculum and probably a hell of a lot more useful than the curriculum that we have actually been taught. You know, that sort of sense of who am I and what is my true power and how do I express that out? Yeah.
Definitely. I think it's so important and so fundamental to being human, because it is the way that it is such a part of our lives, but you know, it's not acknowledged in most cases.
Yeah. I feel actually that's changing. I really do feel that's changing, because when I think about 10 years ago, for example, where we were, or certainly where it felt like I felt we were, because of what was being reflected out in the world and what was available. We have come forward leaps and leaps and leaps and bounds, it feels like. And we've moved into a space now that is more energetic than ever before. I mean, the level of technology that we're using and the fact that we're constantly engaging with energy in some way, shape or form in our day. I mean, there's downsides to that whole sort of like, you know, staring at your screen thing, and the addiction that people have to social media and all of that. But then on the other side of the coin, there's that kind of like developing of a relationship with energy that I don't think I've come across in my lifetime, basically, where we actually are now starting to take the metaphysics of energy like just for granted. It's like an everyday thing for us, you know. I'm talking to you and you're in the middle of the States at the moment, and I'm in the middle of England, and it's kind of like, you know, we take this stuff for granted, but this is pure energy connection here.
Yeah. It's magic.
Across the ethers. And 10 years ago it would have been completely unheard of, you know? So I feel like from that point of view, the third eye is being given more and more space, especially as new generations come forward, is given more and more space and more scope to open out, basically.
Definitely. I agree. It's exciting.
This is really exciting.
Yeah,
So when we move up to the crown chakra is, for me, definitely that area of connecting to our spirituality. It's that area of connecting to our higher selves. It's that area of connecting to the infinity of who we are, so that we can actually see past this physical life, into something that's greater than ourselves, something that's more expansive than who we are, just encased in this body. When it comes to the crown, what comes up for you there?
Yeah, I love the way you say that. For me, what comes up, especially when I work with clients, is knowing. Like that sort of, I want to say clair knowing, but it's like clear knowing, yes. Right? It's just like you instantly, where you just know something. And it's different than when you know it in your gut. Yeah. It's like you know it 100%, you don't know why, yeah. But you just know. Yeah. And the other thing I notice as well is, again, that sense of belonging. It's almost like the first chakra and the crown chakra kind of hold that in a different way, right? And the crown chakra, it's really connected to that divine, your sense of the divine, yeah. Your higher self, and that sense of oneness with everything, yes. That is living, which is such a beautiful thing to tap into, because from that space, you know, I mean, what a beautiful place to operate from in life, right?
Yeah, I mean, I always bring people's attention, because we can sometimes get the whole mix up between spirituality and religion. And a lot of times when I come across people who have actually deliberately shut off their crown chakra, is because of their relationship with religion. For one reason or another, they felt it was too encasing. That sense of like, it always comes down as well to the sacral chakra, that sense of like, I can't express myself freely in terms of my sexuality, sensuality, passion. So if it means that for me to express myself, I can't be religious, then I need to just put a cap on this and pretend that this isn't there, you know, and then it means I can express myself fully as a human being. And one of the things that, you know, I've been bringing people's attention to, that isn't about, I mean, it could be about sort of like following a system and a line. And for some people, that's beautiful. But for me, it's that sense of the analogy that I always bring to the fore with that is that sense of actually either looking at the world through a very small, tight window, or looking at the world from the edge of the universe, and the difference in perspective from those two places. And just because you're looking at the world from a tight, small window doesn't mean that the edge of the universe doesn't exist. So how far would you like to take yourself on that journey, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like the crown really takes us there. It takes us to the edge of the universe, basically.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a really wonderful way to frame it, right? Yeah. Because I mean, I definitely resonate with that experience. Like, and kind of, you know, this sort of circles back to the conversation about self-love, right? There's no judgment about, you know, seeing or experiencing through the frame or experiencing through the edge of the universe, but noticing where I am experiencing my life from, and moving towards where I want to experience it from. Yeah. Yeah. You know, because there is that level of self-care and self-nurturing in that awareness, and then giving it to myself, right? Oh, you know, today I really do want to experience it more from the life, more from the edge of the universe. Let's tap into that for 5 minutes. Yeah. You know, and I think there's this misconception that spiritual work is hard, or you have to go live in a cave in Mexico to really connect with your true self or something. And it doesn't need to be that complicated, you know?
I feel like our collective consciousness is starting to wake up around that, because definitely there was a period when you know, and we have, I keep referencing it because it's so true, and it's where a lot of our fears come from individually, comes from that collective consciousness of it not being safe, it not
Yeah.
being safe to actually live from the edge of the universe, because then you were pointed out and it was highly unsafe physically for you to do that.
True.
You know, and it's kind of like that whole sense of like that sort of like keeping yourself contained and in line, and sort of like within that controlled cultural space that was carved out for us. And if you actually stepped out of that space, you know, you got punished really harshly for it. It did something to the collective psyche, which has then informed a lot of our individual psyche around this. And it feels like now there is an opening up, definitely, of that, to say that I'm an infinite being, you know, and I'd like to be able to kind of like experience all aspects of what that means for me, you know, not having any fear or dogma around that, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
It feels like we're all working. It feels like we're all working up to that. Basically, we're all working up to that point of that sort of expression and that experience of who we are.
Yeah. And I think there's, you know, to your point, I think that's available, that's more available now than it ever has been before on the
Yeah,
planet,
yeah,
right? And there are those opportunities to like connect with yourself on that level and then come back and get frustrated about, you know, your groceries or whatever. And then reconnect with that
yes,
vast space, your
yes,
like your highest, biggest self, and then, you know, vacuum the living room or what, you know, it's like it's kind of that back and forth, right? And then the more we do that, the more in alignment and embodied we
yes,
become with
yes.
that part of ourselves.
Yes, yes. I love this conversation so much, and I love you and your work so much, Anita. Thank you.
I
Thank you
love
for
it too.
just
Thank you so
making the
much,
space
Tash.
and the time to connect and to share.
Thank you so much. This was really fun.